Hi, everybody. Welcome in to the Pump Fake. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And yeah, big news to kick off Super Bowl week. And we're not going to talk about any of the Super Bowl teams because that's why. Um, if you're new to the channel and not subscribed, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a comment. If you're listening to this as a podcast, leave a review, do all of that fun stuff. Appreciate you guys for making the Pump Fake part of your day. Myles Garrett has requested a trade out of Cleveland. And this was something that was foreshadowed by Garrett himself near the end of the regular season. Basically said, yeah, I don't plan on sticking around through a rebuild. Cleveland's going to have to show me that they have real answers and real aspirations in terms of getting back to winning, and not just getting to the playoffs, but like a real chance of winning a championship. And Andrew Berry came out last week and said the Browns will not be trading Myles Garrett, and it looks like Myles Garrett kind of called his bluff and today came out in a statement that said he loves Cleveland, team that drafted him, he loves the city, all of that stuff, before saying that he has requested a trade from Cleveland with aspirations of a chance to win a Super Bowl. And no one can blame Myles Garrett for that, by the way, because this is a guy who came into a situation where he was drafted by the worst team in the NFL, quickly became one of the best players in the NFL, arguably its top pass rusher, and has had to sit back and watch the franchise just self-destruct and shoot itself in the foot, starting with the Deshaun Watson trade. And we've seen how that has turned out, where, yeah, they won on a magic carpet ride with Joe Flacco last season and made it to the playoffs, but were eliminated by the Texans in the wild card round. And that's kind of what the ceiling felt like for Cleveland and how far they could really go. And so if you're Myles Garrett, you can understand the frustration of a guy that talented, constantly in Defensive Player of the Year conversations, winning the award last year, and still playing well this season, but watching his team only win 3 games because of how horrid the quarterback play was and how bad the offense was around him. And for a guy that's still in his prime and still one of the very best players in football, you can't blame him for wanting to go somewhere where he has a chance to win. You could say that about a few other guys in that same position. Like if Max Crosby came out and requested a trade, nobody would blame him, even though they just hired Pete Carroll. They don't have a quarterback. They don't have a superstar receiver. They don't have anything on offense outside of Brock Bowers that really says, yeah, there's something there. Even if like TJ Watt came out, was like, yeah, I want to go somewhere where I can win a Super Bowl, no one will blame him. And so with Garrett, he has every right to want to request a trade. And I think it's easier to point out the teams that wouldn't reach out or wouldn't have any sort of shot. I actually did that in the Sporting News earlier. So you can go and read the 9 teams that I think are completely out on Myles Garrett. Not to say that they don't want him. Every team would want him. But I think there's like 9 teams that have a 0% chance of getting him. And I think those 9 teams are obviously the rest of the AFC North. They're not going to trade him to the Steelers, the Bengals, or the Ravens. They might be a poorly run organization, but they're not that stupid. At least we'd like to think that. The Jets and Giants, I think, are both out. For very similar reasons. They're arguably the 2 worst run franchises in football. And even if the Browns would be like, hey, we're going to trade you to the Jets, Myles Garrett would be like, well, you can tell them I'm not going to play for either of them. So if they do that trade, they're sending you a bunch of resources for nothing because I'll refuse to play. Very clearly said he wants a shot at winning a championship. He's not going to be doing that in New York. And I think just about the entire NFC South is out. Like, imagine being Andrew Berry. You call Myles Garrett into your office. Like, hey, bud, we just traded you to the New Orleans Saints. And then Myles Garrett just grabs you by the shirt and, like, softly but sternly whispers in your ear, alas, not, old friend. And then throws you back down in your chair and says, figure something else out. I'm not going there. Nor will I go to the Buccaneers, the Panthers, or the Falcons. I said contender. I mean contender. And while I'm not sure of the exact nature of his contract, if there is a no trade clause in there, probably something I should have looked at before starting this. But even if he doesn't have one, there's a situation where he can be like, okay, yeah, like you technically can trade me there, but I'm telling you right now, I will not play for that team. And then once the team gets wind of that, they're like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do that. So while he doesn't have, even if he doesn't have a no trade clause, he basically will have one in this case. Now, there is something that would hold back any sort of trade, and that's the fact that the Browns would eat $36 million in dead money because of all the restructures that they've done to his deal. And while it looks like they might get off the hook for the Deshaun Watson injury, considering that he suffered another torn Achilles while away from the facility, so they can void that contract should that be the case. Even so, like, that's not 100% guaranteed yet. And that the last thing that you would want in that situation, the last thing that the Browns could afford in that situation is $36 million in dead money to their best player who they just traded away. So while it looks like they might get off scot-free of the Deshaun Watson thing, there's no, 100% guarantee of that. And it's not worth risking. Oh, by the way, we got to pay Deshaun Watson still, and there's $36 million in dead money. We don't know what we're going to do this year. So if you're the Browns, you don't want to, mess around with any sort of potential Myles Garrett trade, knowing that you're going to eat that money until you're 100% certain that you're off the hook for Deshaun Watson. Now, this could also just be a play by Myles Garrett for, some sort of extension. But there's part of him, or a big part of him, that wants to win. Well, the money's great. But when you're going, 5-12 every year, you can get money elsewhere and win. Like, you can have your cake and eat it too. And so, yeah, like, could Cleveland find a way to give him a hefty extension and keep him in town? Sure. But I know if I'm Garrett, I don't want to stay there. And I'm not just saying that as a Steelers fan or a Bills guy or anything like that. I'm saying it as a guy who wouldn't want to always be losing. And for the better part of 26 years, that's what the Browns have done, with few exceptions. They had, a 10-win season in 2007, but still missed the playoffs. They won 10-6 that year with Derek Anderson at quarterback. You get back to the playoffs, Baker Mayfield, and you win a playoff game in 2020. That was great. You get back to the playoffs in 2023 with Flacco, but then you lose a playoff game. So, for Cleveland, it's largely been, a team that doesn't win. And if you're Myles Garrett, you're more than aware of that. And you'd probably want to go somewhere where you can win. And so I've already pointed out the teams that I think are out. So let's talk about the teams that are more than likely in. The Bills and the Lions are going to be the two teams that everyone points at, and understandably so. For the Bills, look at all of their top picks since they drafted Josh Allen. It's not exactly a murderer's row. Ed Oliver, Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, AJ Epinesa, Greg Rousseau, Kyer Elam. None of which have turned out to be superstars. Greg Rousseau's been fine. AJ Epinesa's been fine. None of them are game wreckers. Ed Oliver, they overpaid to keep him around, and he had a bad year in 2024. And then Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid, you could say, oh, well, they're rookies. Well, Malik Neighbors was a rookie too. Brian Thomas was a rookie too. Xavier Worthy was a rookie too. And Keon Coleman was very disappointing this year as a rookie. Dalton Kincaid was supposed to take that next step forward because he had a solid rookie year, and then he took a big step backwards in year 2. So they haven't exactly knocked these things out of the park since drafting Josh Allen. So they should have no issues whatsoever parting ways with a couple of first-round picks and change to get Myles Garrett. If you send 2 1s, a 3 and a 6, what are you going to get with any of those picks that's going to be more impactful than Myles Garrett? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So the Bills should absolutely be on the phone. Brandon Beane should have picked up as soon as he saw the Rappaport tweet, called Andrew Barry, and said, what do you want? Now, they can't make anything official until the new league year starts, but these conversations should be taking place. The Detroit Lions, it makes sense from a standpoint of, hey, you got Aiden Hutchinson on one side once he gets back and healthy, which it's very expected he'll be fine to start training camp and all of that stuff in the offseason and be good to go for week 1 after breaking his leg earlier in the 2024 season. So if you can get Aiden Hutchinson and Myles Garrett on opposite ends of each other, hey, that's going to make life hard for every offensive line in the NFL. Now they're going to be, having to figure out things coordinator-wise with both Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn leaving for head coaching jobs. But, if they keep things in-house, if Mark Brunell takes the job, then basically you're just employing from within. You're going to keep the same system, and you should be relatively all right with all that talent offensively. But we'll see. Regardless, though, the Lions are still going to be a team that is competitive at the very least. And if you add Myles Garrett to a defense like that, you've had 2 seasons now where, in 2023, you get to the NFC title game. This past year was disappointing because you lose to Washington in the divisional round, but you still had a tremendous regular season. And so from a Lions perspective, yes, of course it makes sense, especially if you have the funds to get it done. Other teams that might fly a little bit under the radar. I know I said the Panthers would be a no, but for a team that, is building on the momentum from last year, I mean, maybe there's a world where Myles Garrett says, yeah, I like what Bryce Young showed last year. They have a bunch of money to spend because they're not paying a quarterback. They can pay me. They can pay other guys. Then maybe. I don't think it's going to happen. But they do have the draft capital to give Cleveland to make it at least enticing. New England's another team because they have the draft picks to make it enticing. And really, for New England, they're interesting because they have the quarterback. Drake May looks like he's going to be very good and showed that he was the correct pick for New England this past season. And they've got a head coach who has proven that he can make the most of any situation and he can win. Mike Vrabel took the Tennessee Titans to an AFC championship game. So they've got the head coach, they got the quarterback, they have money. They can build around Drake May and have a Chargers-esque season, hopefully a better postseason, but be that team that struggled this past season, gets a new head coach that knows what he's doing, and then turns things around in 2025. So they're an interesting name to watch as well. And then looking elsewhere, I saw somebody, Rossini tweeted that she got a text from a GM saying, what about the Raiders and pairing with Max Crosby? I don't think that that's going to happen because, again, if you're Myles Garrett and you want to win, why would you go to a team that, they hired Pete Carroll and that's great, but they don't have a quarterback. They don't have, a receiver or anything like that. So, the Raiders are probably out. But it is fun to think about Myles Garrett and Max Crosby on the same team. That would be very fun to watch. Would they trade him to the Chiefs? I certainly hope not. If they did that, I think that would be a situation where you would have to David Stern it. When the Hornets tried trading Chris Paul to the Lakers, David Stern stepped in and said, that's just going to throw off all competitive balance in the NBA. We're not letting you do that. And so they traded him to the Clippers. I think that is a situation where Roger Goodell would have to step in and be like, dude, you guys, especially if they win the Super Bowl this year, you guys have won 3 straight Super Bowls. We're not letting this happen. Sorry. I just don't think the NFL, I don't think it would be good for the NFL. Because there's already people talking about, oh, it's rigged. They're wrong, and that's stupid. But if the Chiefs were to get Myles Garrett, it would throw off all competitive balance, competitive nature. It would throw off all semblance of parity in the NFL if they win 3 straight Super Bowls and get Myles Garrett. I think that's a situation where Roger Goodell would have to step in and be like, we're not letting you do that. Sorry. And I'll get roasted for saying that, and that's fine. Whatever. I'll die on the hill of that. But for the good of the NFL, I think that that would be the best thing that the league could do is, hey, we're not letting you do that. I think the Chargers would be interesting if we're just going to kind of go team by team, division by division. The Chargers would be interesting. You know, this is a team that had a really nice year this past season. They have the quarterback. I know that Justin Herbert had a bad game against the Texans in the playoffs. Doesn't make him like god awful. It did move him down a tier, but he's still a very good quarterback. And you get Myles Garrett on the defensive side of the ball, adding to a defense that's already pretty good, but is going to need to retool because Mack and Bosa are both old and always hurt. Especially if you can get like a Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa in return. Although I do believe Khalil Mack's going to be a free agent. But the Chargers are interesting. The Broncos. That's maybe. They have a very underrated defense full of guys that don't get talked about enough because they play largely in 4 o'clock regional windows because they're in Denver. They weren't necessarily a high-profile team. They're a playoff team, but they're not, they aren't, in the echelon of like the most watched teams, the must-watch teams in the NFL. So, guys like Zach Allen and Nick Bonino, who got my vote for Defensive Player of the Year on the PFWA ballot, they kind of went unsung. Patrick Surtain obviously gets a lot of love, but the guys, in the front 7 didn't get as much credit as they should. But you add Myles Garrett to Bonito and Zach Allen, that would be a very tough defense to go up against every week. So that's the AFC West. AFC North, we already know. The Bills make sense. The Dolphins, if you're the Dolphins, why would you do it? Like, obviously, it's Myles Garrett, but if we're being completely real, that's not a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. That window's basically closed. Tyreek Hill is all but gone. They're going to trade him. And then what? You're going to get 2021 Tua and Myles Garrett, which is great. Defense will be a little bit better, but the offense is going to take a massive step back. I don't think that that's the move that the Dolphins should look to make. Already, he's not going to go to the Jets. Patriots could be fun. AFC South, don't think he would entertain the Jaguars. That's an organization that is just, they've made some moves over the past few weeks. Like, obviously, Shad Khan went back and was like, all right, obviously keeping Trent Baalke isn't going to work. I'm going to fire Trent Baalke, going to hire Liam Cohen. Hiring Tony Baselli in the front office, it seems like a good move. But even so, even though they have Brian Thomas, even though they have Trevor Lawrence, that's a team that had a really bad year and seems too inconsistent. The Colts, wildly just up in the air when it comes to the quarterback position. I don't think that would make sense for the Colts. I shouldn't say it wouldn't make sense for the Colts. It makes sense for every team to add a guy like Myles Garrett. It wouldn't make sense for Myles Garrett to want to go there. The Texans already have Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, so I think that kind of it takes them out because they already have 2 very good pass rushers, so not going to happen there. The Titans are bad, so no, that's not happening. NFC wise, I think we already talked about the Lions in the NFC North. The Packers would be fun. Put him alongside Edgerrin Cooper. That would make one of the best edge rushing duos in the league. Edgerrin Cooper just got progressively better as the season went on, especially in the final month and a half of the season when the Packers were in prime time for a month straight. Everybody got to see how good Edge Cooper was, and he played great. So putting Myles Garrett on that defensive line, that would be pretty cool. Minnesota. Oh, bro. Imagine Myles Garrett and a Brian Flores defense. Yeah, sign me up for that. That would be very fun. It's a well-coached team with Kevin O'Connell. We'll see with the quarterback situation. Don't know what's going to happen there. Or do they do this? Do they do a sign and trade situation where the Browns send Myles Garrett to Minnesota, and again, a sign and trade situation where they would get Sam Darnold? Maybe. Or if the Vikings really want to keep Sam Darnold, which I don't think they're going to do, I think it is going to be J.J. McCarthy, but just hypothetically speaking, if the Browns are like, hey, we'd like J.J. McCarthy as part of the deal, then regardless, you end up with a quarterback in that situation. But for Minnesota, it makes sense because they are one of those teams that I wouldn't put them. I don't care that they won 14 games. I'm not putting them in that elite tier of teams. A, because we saw how the season ended, and B, I don't know what the quarterback situation is going to look like. But that's a really well-coached team that is going to win at least 10 games more than likely and be a playoff team at minimum. You add a Myles Garrett to that, and if the quarterback situation does end up panning out, then you've got a real good shot. The Bears would be very, history repeating itself with the Khalil Mack trade from a few years ago. Ben Johnson, hopefully he's a good hire, but we don't know. Caleb Williams had a fine rookie year, despite what everybody on Twitter wants to tell you. In terms of a rookie season, he played fine. Got a lot to clean up, but that's playing quarterback in the NFL for the first time. I wouldn't say there's a 0% chance for the Bears, but I would say I don't think that will be the team that gets it. So that's the NFC North. The NFC East, it would be a very Dallas move to do that. But if I'm Myles Garrett, I don't want to go there because there's no long-term plan there. Brian Schottenheimer feels like a stopgap coach. Defensively, there's not much else there. Offensively, it's Dak, CD, and a bunch of dudes. So I don't think that Dallas would be the place I'd want to go if I'm Myles Garrett. But it would be a very Jerry Jones move to be like, trade heaven and earth to get him. Trade our next 5 first-round picks. Now I think Steven would step in and be like, no, Dad, we're not giving up, our next half decades worth of first-round picks to get him. But I would fully expect them to be at least interested because it would be a very Cowboys move to try to land a player of that caliber. Even though they're just an extremely top-heavy team right now. They have no depth. And that would just be very funny to watch them add another star with nothing behind them. The Commanders. That would be fun. That's a defense that needs the help. They can't stop the run whatsoever. They don't have, a top tier pass rusher. Dante Fowler had a really nice year, and that's great. But they don't have, a legit top tier get to the quarterback guy. They're a team that just made it to the NFC title game. You add Myles Garrett to that roster, a team that has a ton of money. I'd say Washington would be a team to watch. The Eagles, probably not. I just don't think they already have a really good defensive line, really good defense. It would be kind of redundant. I think their attention should be on the offensive side of the ball. NFC South, we already basically wrote out everybody. NFC West. Seattle, I think they're going to kind of hit a soft reboot button this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if Geno Smith and DK Metcalf are both traded. Because if we look at Mike McDonald's end-of-year presser, where he's like, how do you feel? Is Geno Smith going to be your quarterback? And he's like, well, I mean, he's on the roster, so I guess I'll say yes. Like, okay, dude. That was a vote of confidence if I've ever seen one. So I think that Geno Smith's probably going to be dealt. And in turn, I think DK Metcalf will probably be dealt. And they're going to just kind of softly reboot this thing with, a quarterback that the current administration wants. So I don't think that a Myles Garrett acquisition would make sense for either side. The Cardinals. I think, okay, let's talk about the Cardinals. If you're the Browns and you can get Kyler Murray in the deal, then maybe. But then if you're Myles Garrett and you're going to Arizona, you're like, all right, well, there's no quarterback here. So I'm not going to do that. So you can agree to the deal, but I'm not playing in Arizona. So I think it would have to be a situation kind of like on draft day where the Cardinals would get a quarterback for the future and then send Kyler Murray to the Browns. But the idea of a Kyler Murray being part of a trade for Myles Garrett is kind of enticing. Who else am I missing in the NFC? The Rams. I think the Rams are like a year away from rebooting. So, if they wanted to go all in one more time, kind of like they did when they won their first Super Bowl, right? Where they trade for Odell Beckham. Or no, I think they just signed Odell Beckham. I don't think they even had to trade for him because the Browns released him. Sign Odell Beckham. You traded for Jalen Ramsey the year prior. Yeah, you just had you traded for Stafford that year. Like they just basically traded for their team and bought their team. It was like, we're going to bring in a bunch of established stars and that's how we're going to win. And it worked. You can do that one more time. Like if you trade for Myles Garrett, you trade for somebody like a Cortland Sutton. It could work. You sign somebody like a DJ Reed. Like they could run back what they did in 2022 and just sign and trade for a bunch of guys. And it could work. Did I miss anybody in the NFC West? Cardinals, Rams, Seahawks. 49ers, wouldn't that be just the worst? Oh, that would suck. I think I probably speak for everybody, though, outside of fans of these teams. Please, God, no, not to the Eagles. Please, not the Chiefs. Please, not the 49ers. Give it to a team like Buffalo, like Detroit, like a Minnesota. Someone like that where we don't hate these teams as a collective. A Washington would be awesome. Give it to one of those. Let's hope that one of those teams ends up with him and can make a push at this thing. Rather than, oh God, the Chiefs got Myles Garrett. Please no. But again, most people are going to point to the Bills and the Lions and be like, hey, those make the most sense. Those would be the most fun. I would agree. And we'll see who ends up pulling the trigger on that. But for the time being, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, subscribe, do all of that fun stuff. If you are listening as a podcast, leave a review. I'll see you guys later on in the week. Take care until then. This is the Pump Fake.